Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I think that question being asked in the media, that's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build
point
a
in U.S. intelligence assessments. You know that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not been made.
I know that better than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But I'm asking you whether the order was given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons. Because they can quickly make it 90. They have all the elements. They have. Why do they have a space program? Is Iran going to go to the moon? No. They're trying to build an ICBM.
No, but that's a question. That's a question.
Joining me live now is our Sky News US analyst, Michael Ware. Michael has a long history of being a war correspondent. He smuggled himself into Pakistan, across the border to Afghanistan after 9/11, and of course spent 8 years in Iraq. Michael, great to have you back on AM Agenda. Where would you like to start? Because there are so many implications here. Even if this is a one and done, this changes the complexity in the Middle East. Is it diplomacy or is it retaliation?
Well, that's the great question, isn't it? It really has, in many ways, upended the current formula for the Middle East. And that was already a messy batch, that formula. So, look, one of the questions here, has President Trump entered the United States into yet another Middle East war of choice, one that he did not have to take this country into? Yeah. Now, his people, his Secretary of Defense, says no, their dream, realistic or not, that this is a one and done. The Defense Secretary went out of his way to say, we're not at war with you, the Iranian government. We're not at war with you, the Iranian people. We're at war with your nuclear program. So somehow they'd like to think that the Iranians will cop this operation on the chin and then move on, hopefully, to diplomacy. If not, there's many other actions and retaliations Iran could take that would suck America back into the Middle East. But let's not forget, there's just one thing I'd like to say. Whether you approve of it, disapprove of it, whether it works or whether it sends us into more biblical chaos, this was a stunningly successful US military operation and a full display of American military superiority and their ability to reach out across the planet and touch you.
Absolutely. Donald Trump does have the tendency to use hyperbole, but he's absolutely right when he says that there's no other military in the world that could have undertaken this mission, whether it's the B-2 bombers carrying those bunker buster bombs and that facility in Fordo. Now, we've only been given grainy footage as proof, and if it's total obliteration or this nuclear program severely damaged, it really doesn't matter in the context of things. Although it does matter in terms of how Iran might approach their next step here. Do they do it from a position of strength? Well, it doesn't seem like there's much strength left, but we've got to look at those options that Iran has available to it. I mean, does it hit some of these US targets in the Middle East? I mean, they wouldn't be hugely damaging, but it would be a signal, and any loss of life, of course, Donald Trump would take very seriously. But it would have to be a pretty brave Iranian regime, wouldn't it, Michael, to hit, you know, for example, a US base in Saudi Arabia?
It would be. They've done that before. They used the Houthi rebels in Yemen to attack Saudi oil facilities, and that got the Saudis' attention enough that the Saudis started to warm up to Iran. I mean, look, the Arab states in the region, our allies, have been warming up to both Israel and to Iran because what they're seeking is economic prosperity. And that only happens with stability. And this attack, pardon the pun, has completely blown that apart. So the first question is, how successful was or wasn't this attack and the Israeli attacks in destroying the Iranian nuclear program? Well, it depends on who you talk to. President Trump says he's totally obliterated it, but no one else agrees with him. His Secretary of Defense says that they've devastated it. But the further you go from the President to the Secretary of Defense to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the more qualified are the assessments of the damage, because the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs says that there was severe damage, but we need to wait longer to see just how much. Even the Israeli Defense Force says it was a direct hit and a deep impact, but even they don't know whether they have really nobbled the Iranian nuclear program. And to sum it up, the head of the UN's nuclear agency, the IAEA, says, look, at the end of the day, right now, none of us on the planet know how much damage was done. And that includes us, the inspectors. So that could affect Iran's calculations.
Yeah.
I mean, best case scenario, they take this really hard, bloody punch on the nose, capitulate and return to the negotiating table. That doesn't seem very likely.
No, it doesn't, does it? I mean, Iran's never liked to start diplomacy or negotiation from a position of weakness. They prefer that to do from a position of strength. That's a statement of the obvious. Every country does that, of course. But I just wanted to finally ask you, Michael, because there's been a lot of parallels drawn, I think fairly, when it comes to an American public an Australian public, even about getting involved in forever wars and sacrificing our own people. So the parallels are that promise that there were weapons of mass destruction. We heard that in Iraq after 9/11, and we've heard that this time around. But I would argue they are very different circumstances, even though those words have largely been echoed. I mean, you spent 8 years in Iraq. You became the main point of contact there in Iraq with the Iranian ambassador. You know this area better than anyone else I know. So what are those differences this time round? Can you see a scenario of a forever war and boots on the ground? Because I don't see how that happens straight away. There won't be boots on the ground.
Israel is incapable of putting boots on Iranian soil, and while the US could, you've got to understand, Iraq was 25 or 30 million people on flat desert. Iran is 90 million people in mountainous terrain.
Yeah.
It would be something akin to the Eastern Front in World War II with Russia, if you wanted to put boots on the ground. So you almost certainly have to continue an air campaign and a cyber campaign. The Israelis have talked about slipping in special forces, particularly to Fordo, but even that is a stretch to believe that it's possible. So, look, the responses remain difficult, and right now the ball is in Iran's court. And so, right, okay, they're not going to capitulate. So what are they going to do? Most likely, they're going to keep throwing stones or ballistic missiles at Israel, avoid US targets while they regroup. That, I think, is the most likely event. If they want to escalate, they still have proxies. Even though Hezbollah has been diminished and Hamas has been diminished, the Houthis are still out there. But this puts Iraq back front and centre again, because that's where they control very powerful militias and political parties that could quickly turn on US forces there. And worst case scenario is that Iran decides to commit economic suicide and close the vital Straits of Hormuz through a waterway through which leads a quarter of the world's oil and a quarter of the world's gas. Now, that will hurt Iran as much as anybody else, but that's their suicide button.
It'll hurt Europe as well. And I guess, Michael, the fear is whether Iran, through its proxies, has the ability to also carry out terror attacks in Western countries, in particular the United States.
Well, assassinations are definitely on the cards, and kidnappings of Americans or others in the Middle East or even in Europe. That's another option they can use, is black ops. Whichever option they choose, I can guarantee you this, they're not going to double down on their nuclear program. They're going to triple down. And even as the UN nuclear watchdog says, we don't know how much stuff they moved out of these facilities before they were struck.
Michael, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for your insights. We'll talk again soon.